Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Caregiving Gen X Style. I'm Steve Mullen.
And I'm Jennifer Mullen.
There are a lot of reasons that an assisted living facility may be the best place for your elderly loved one, but there are actually a lot of reasons that it might not be the right choice either. In this episode, we're going to look at what this type of facility is all about and how you can find the right one. But first, Jennifer, how's your mom?
My mom's doing great.
Great. Wonderful.
That was simple.
Yeah.
Actually, so instead of a how's my mom, who really truly is doing well. We're living in the good old days.
Woohoo.
And I'm trying to appreciate every moment of that. I do have a how's your mom?
Yeah.
How's your mom for me?
Right.
Recently when we were preparing for the move, you were out of town and
I was on my golf trip.
You were on your golf trip. And I was also headed out of town for one night. Mm-hmm. And I actually had my coworker in the car. She's also a listener of this show. She and her husband both listen to this show. And driving down the road, phone rings. And it's your mom. And I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, because Jennifer was in charge. I was out of state.
Right. Yep. I was just going to be gone for the one night. But anyway, she gets on the phone and she was trying to give your email address to one of the movers.
Right.
Who was there for an estimate. And we just had a devil of a time. She kept trying to say your email address to me. She was saying it incorrectly. Mm-hmm. I kept trying to repeat it back to her and get it correct. And she just her hearing's not great. So it really was like this comical moment. And finally she's like, I'm just going to put him on the phone with you. So she puts the mover on the phone with me and I say the email address and he's like, yep, got it. And then, hang up. But of course my coworker thinks this is hysterical because
of course she does.
She got to witness one of these episodes up close and personal because she's been listening to the podcast for a year and a half. And then of course added to that, not related to my coworker hearing all of that, in the hotel room, I get to my location, I'm in the hotel room for an hour, phone rings, it's your mom again. Sure enough, she's asking for your email address again. I guess she hadn't written it. I guess the first time she wrote it down on the mover's estimate paperwork, but didn't write it down for herself.
Right.
So there was another mover coming the next day for an estimate, so she needed to get the email address again, in which we proceeded to have almost an identical conversation where I was trying to tell her what your email address was, and she just could not get it right. She did finally get it right, but yeah.
Well, she did write it down, and I did see it on a pad.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, so we wanted to get 3 estimates for the movers. The third one, she gave them the wrong email address.
Yeah.
And also, weirdly, the wrong phone number, too. So, they ended up having to hand deliver their estimate.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure they were not entirely thrilled with. We ended up going with them, so they got our business.
And they were great, as we talked about in a previous episode. So, all right. Well, truly, though, how's your mom?
She's doing great. She's settling in. I do have one thing to say, and I've hesitated whether I wanted to say this or not, but I've kind of figured out a way to do it. So, we've discussed on this podcast how things turned terrible in my mother's old assisted living, and that's why she moved. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to mention the name of her assisted living because I did not want to. We're kind of careful about mentioning exactly where we live. But Harmony Senior Services is the name of the company that owns that particular assisted living. They own, I want to say 3 dozen, maybe more, maybe 4 dozen facilities, mostly in the Southeast and a little bit up the East Coast. Avoid them.
Yeah.
Avoid them.
Beware.
And I'll tell you why. I don't think it's just this facility. I really, really don't. And here's why. Because the day before her stuff was packed up, Jennifer and I were over at her apartment. Jennifer was packing up the teapots. And an employee came in. Lovely lady. She's worked there the whole time. She's one of the good ones there. And she sat down and talked with us for a while. And she was fully aware of everything that happened with my mother. And she was actually at the skilled nursing when the executive director went over to get reports about my mother before she was allowed to come back. After the meeting that I had with that executive director where she spewed out stuff that was absolutely not true about my mother, this lady sent an email to the CEO and said, what is going on? Why is this happening? I know this woman. I was there for the report that came from the physical therapist that she's doing great, and all of a sudden he's being told she's not. Why? The response she got back was basically that they were trying to get rid of all the people in wheelchairs. That is not
Which
acceptable.
we suspected.
We did suspect
We
that.
suspected
It was
that
the only
they
thing that made any
They
sense.
were trying to get rid of the residents who required more care.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
Which stinks. Because what else is assisted living for? I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So we're going to talk all about assisted living in this episode, but I did want to get that out there. Harmony Senior Services. If you are looking for assisted living, avoid them.
Stay away.
Because I don't think it's just ours.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So we've said many, many times in this podcast, we've talked about it just now. My mother lives in an assisted living facility, otherwise known as an ALF. And she just moved from one to another. The new one is much, much better. This episode is going to be an attempt to share with our listeners what we have learned having to basically search, to go through 2 assisted living searches, and my mother living there for 2.5 years. We've talked about some of these topics on this show. We have. I know we have. But we wanted to get them all into one episode. And also share, some of the new things that we've learned over the last few months. So, biggest consideration when it comes to choosing an assisted living, money.
Definitely.
Money.
Yeah, we're talking about, here in the United States, healthcare is very different elsewhere in the world. But depending on where you live, you can expect to pay anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 per month to live in one of these places.
Yeah.
And $3,000, I think, is probably totally unrealistic at this point.
You're only going to find a few places that are anywhere near that.
I mean, it's insane how much it costs to take care of, someone, not just an elderly person, but anyone who maybe needs to live in an assisted living facility. It's crazy.
It's insane. And your loved one's cost will vary based on how much care they need. So this is called level of care pricing. The last place my mother was in did it. The place my mother's in now does it. Pretty sure just about every place does something along these lines. So someone who's a little forgetful but is physically able to get around and take care of themselves with only a little bit of help will pay less than someone who is like my mother in a wheelchair and needs help getting from here to there and everywhere, or someone who has a pretty bad memory problem. Memory care facilities. Some assisted living do only memory care. Some assisted living facilities have a memory care wing. Memory care is the most expensive type of assisted living. You expect to pay top of the level that we just mentioned.
Which makes sense because you pretty much need to have somebody's eyeballs on them 24/7.
Sure, exactly.
So, yeah. Well, so there's also some of these facilities that have shared rooms or apartments. So, maybe they might end up with a roommate.
And that is the low end of it. That's more like the $3,000, maybe $2,500 if you're lucky. I mean, that's what you're going to pay there.
It's a cheaper situation.
So you got a roommate, though. But
of course, putting 2 people in a room together, again, it doesn't even necessarily have to be an elderly person, but it's most of the time what we're talking about with ALFs. But putting 2 people in a room together in a smallish space is challenging, I would say. Certainly could be challenging.
Sure, yeah.
The problem, too, is a lot of these facilities do not take insurance.
Most of them.
Medicare or Medicaid. They might accept funding from a long-term care insurance plan, but even that would caution you to do your research. From everything we've been hearing in the just minimal amount of information gathering we've been doing about long-term insurance recently, you buy long-term insurance and you think it's going to cover all these things, and there's like 10,000 nuances, right? Same thing when you have like homeowners, insurance.
Right.
Often it doesn't cover everything you think it might. So,
right.
Yeah, it's expensive. There's no doubt about it. And for the most part, someone who's in a limited income situation is going to have a much more difficult time trying to find a place like that to live in.
It needs to be a situation where there's a pension, where there's good higher Social Security coming in, or there's just a bulk of money set aside from IRAs or investments or whatever. And thankfully, that's the situation my mother's in. She was very fortunate. But with the money talk out of the way, let's talk about what assisted living is.
We're also going to talk about what it isn't.
We are going to talk about what it is not.
Too.
That's true. Okay. Assisted living facilities, they provide meals, entertainment, assistance with activities of daily living, which some people call ADL, for the residents. Most also include services like housekeeping, medication management, and transportation for trips like doctor's appointments, which is really important for somebody, particularly like my mother, who has a heck of a time getting in my car. Mm-hmm. Actually, she cannot get in my car. It's an SUV.
Yeah.
She can only get into Jennifer's car, which is a car.
Yeah. Yeah. So most of the ALFs also offer either a studio, a 1-bedroom, or 2-bedroom apartment. So, if maybe you're taking care of elderly parents and maybe only one even needs to be in assisted living, but they want to stay together, those 2-bedroom apartments are certainly an option if you need a little bit more space.
And I have seen that. I have seen situations where one of the spouses really doesn't need to be there, but the other one absolutely does, and they don't want to be split up.
Or a mother and son, right?
There's
a mother and son, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the son, I think, was even older than we are by 10 years. So and his mom was that much older.
I've actually seen 2 situations like that. Now that I think of it, there was one. This is both at my mother's old assisted living. There was a situation where we kept seeing this guy. I was like, why is he here?
Yeah.
He looks perfectly fine. Why is he here? And it turns out he was living with his mother.
Yeah.
There's actually somebody still at a different couple, different son and mother. And he's got some disabilities, but I don't think he needs to be there either. So that's a very interesting situation. At ALFs, you'll find that CNAs are on call to assist, although sadly at many, the response time is not as fast as you would like. You can get like an emergency pendant. A lot of times they'll charge you for it.
Like a medical alert button, like my mom has. I mean, it's the same type of thing.
Charge you like $20 a month for it. And you press that. And you would hope that somebody would show up in 15 or 20 minutes. A lot of times it's more like an hour, and that's insane. Somebody could be laying on the floor bleeding out. Yeah,
that part does make me definitely very nervous. Of course, that can happen if you're living at home independently and you shouldn't be. But
well, sure.
It is crazy to me that when you're in, you and I have talked about this before. We have these 2 very different situations. My mom's living independently, but she's got her medical alert button. Mm-hmm. But you know what? At least if she presses her medical alert button, the ambulance is there like that.
They're there in 20 minutes. Yeah.
Your mom has pressed her button. I don't mean medical alert button, but just the button because she needs help.
Right.
And sometimes,
and there are supposedly lots of CNAs walking around, med techs walking around, administrators walking around, somebody walking around who should be able to check on her. But I'm telling you, there have been situations, and I mean, I hate to even bring it up like this, but it's kind of bad. I mean, she got herself onto the toilet to go to the bathroom, but needed help getting off. She sat there for an hour and a half.
Yeah, which is
no one came. She's pressing her emergency button, and she's pressing the button on the wall.
Yeah,
and no one shows up. And it is unacceptable. That's one of the reasons she's moving. And I will say the response time where she is now is significantly better. Yeah. It's really 15, 20 minutes, she said, which that's fine.
Right.
I have no problem with that.
So an ALF is definitely, speaking of the nots, what are they not? They are not a healthcare facility. And, I know we've touched on this in some past episodes. Many of these facilities certainly have a healthcare provider, like a nurse practitioner on the premises, but anything beyond basic healthcare really has to be handled somewhere else. So, for instance, most of these places won't handle wound care or IVs which I guess I get that part. I mean, CNAs aren't really qualified to handle, those tasks. And wound care you have to be really careful with. But I know you and I have had this, I think, and I know we've said this before, like we've just been surprised at what sort of the definition
where
of
the line is drawn.
Yeah.
I will say, so at her old assisted living, they did not do wound care. They said, sorry, we don't do wound care. You're going to have to bring somebody in from the outside. At her new one, it's the same kind of deal. However, their PT and OT is provided by an outside agency, which is actually one that we've used before. My mother did need a little wound checkup. She has a tendency to get a little pressure sore on the bottom of her foot, the bad foot that just sits on the wheelchair rest all day long.
Yeah.
And they wanted to bring somebody in to look at it, maybe bandage it up. They just called someone from that agency, and they just came in. So that was really no trouble at all for us. I didn't even know it happened until after it was over.
They still managed it, though, so that was good.
Which is fantastic. Yeah. So they may have a situation like that, but on a day-to-day basis, things like wound care, IVs, forget it. It's just not happening. You got to get somebody else to do it.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned PT and OT. So, right, some of these places provide physical therapy, occupational therapy, even on premise. Some of them have small little physical therapy rooms, certainly that the residents can access. But some of the other services, which you might not think about, but like it's really important to know, podiatry. Trust me, speaking of podiatry, that is definitely something. My mom goes to a healthcare. It's
a chain.
You can mention the name it's called Gen Care. So if you've ever heard of it before, and it's been really fascinating to me. And again, we've mentioned my mom's unlimited income, so she's using Medicare and Medicaid and this insurance that she has. She goes to Gen Care, but actually it's really amazing because they have specialists come in.
I'm very impressed with what they provide.
I mean, her primary care provider is a nurse practitioner, and she does exactly what you'd think, keeping an eye on mom every day or every visit, but like a podiatrist comes in or a cardiologist comes in, and she's able to have that kind of care at that facility. But same thing at these assisted living facilities. They have some of these specialty doctors come in. So podiatry is a big thing for older people.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Well, they have them come into, they actually had them in the old one. They had them come into the new one. And I mean, like my mother, your mother, they can't reach down to their feet.
They can't really reach their feet all that well.
So,
but like it's important, and especially if they're even, a little bit pre-diabetic. Like
sure.
we all know there's a whole thing with the circulation in the feet and whatever. So it's great that they have that. Of course, the facilities often have a pharmacy.
I will say both of the ones my mother's been in, I'm going to assume that this is a relatively common thing since it's both of the ones. They use like a mail order pharmacy.
Right.
But they submit the prescriptions, they manage it, they get everything, blah, 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 blah. So it's not a pharmacy in the building, but they manage your prescriptions through a pharmacy.
Dental services. I mean, that's pretty.
That's a great one.
That's
at this
impressive.
New places, they have a dentist that comes in, I think, once a month or something, and can do things like very light cleanings, denture care, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a little checkup, and if you need a filling, I'm sure they're not going to do it right there, but you'll at least know that they have to go to a regular dentist. So that's a nice thing.
Yeah. And of course, really the most important thing.
Oh yeah.
For the ladies.
Yes.
The hair salon.
The hair salon.
And even nails. This place where your mom is now, they
she's so
offer
excited
nails.
about that.
Which is your mom's nail. She's always had her nails to perfection. So
yes,
good for
she's
her.
Very excited about that. And they do gel nails, which she's really excited about. But the hair salon, it's funny. So my grandmother she had Alzheimer's, and she was in an assisted living facility for a while until she had to go to a nursing home and with a memory care. And I remember going to visit her and hearing about the hair salon. And at the time, I'm 32, something like that. And I didn't really get why they needed a hair salon. And apparently I remember my mother telling me, she's got a weekly standing appointment. And I thought, that's weird. I'm a guy. Yeah. Okay. And now I realize these little old ladies, they want to get their hair did every week.
But also, like, it makes you, in general, it makes you feel better. So there is something to be said for that.
And my mother now has the standing once a week appointment, and she gets her hair did. And I can always tell if I come in right after she got it done.
Too. Yeah, I can too.
No, so it's nice, and that's nice where it's self-care.
Yes. We touched on this briefly. What is an assisted living facility? What is it not? So we'll say to live there, your loved one really still has to be somewhat independent.
Right. And we've talked about this in the past, but let's lay it out.
They've got to be able to get themselves really into bed and out of bed, on and off the toilet, in and out of a chair with really minimal assistance.
Really, it's generally one person helping.
That's what they're looking for. Yeah. That's what the facility wants to provide.
Right.
And, how much assistance they're willing to give will vary from place to place. Mm-hmm. They definitely need to still be somewhat independent. And again, took us a while, I think, to reconcile in our heads.
When my mother moved into assisted living for the first time, we still had no idea, even after we've signed all the papers and everything, we really didn't realize that. And I will say the new place, there is a level of care where it's 2-person assist for transfer. She doesn't need that.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that if she slips to that level, she can still stay there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's nice.
Well, and so, if someone's in a wheelchair, like your mom is, it has created some problems. It has created some challenges. But, if they can get a decent bit of occupational therapy, which your mom has been able to do, and over time, she really has learned how to transfer herself in and out of her wheelchair, somewhat independently. And that's made all the difference in the world.
On an average day, she really ought to have somebody in the room with her for safety reasons.
Yes.
But they're not picking her up. They're not doing anything. They're just making sure she doesn't fall.
Yeah.
She can do pretty much everything herself on an average day.
But it is that's a question you should be asking when you're touring a facility, which I know we're going to talk about that later in this episode, but you definitely need to be asking, what is your expectation? Yes. And remember this terminology about 1-person assist, 2-person assist, because we very, very quickly early on got a lesson in what all of that meant and what the expectation was. So definitely important to know.
And what we found is that assisted living facilities, ALFs, are on kind of a spectrum. Yeah. It's interesting. Some of them specialize in memory care. Some have special memory care wings. We talked about that. Some places that call themselves assisted living expect their residents to be more independent than other ALFs. And I think my mother's old one, that's what they're doing. They're moving a little more independent.
Right. So we were just touching on that. I mean, you definitely need to understand what the level of independence is to get the assistance.
Well, basically, what they're willing to deal with is what it comes down to, sadly.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for ALFs, ask detailed questions, like Jennifer said. I mean, you really need to burrow down to find out exactly what they're willing to do.
Yep. Yeah. All right, let's talk about activities.
Yay.
Because
that's the fun part.
Because it's fun. Yeah. So, most of these places, they definitely have sort of the basics like bingo.
Bingo.
Got to have bingo.
I asked about bingo when we were searching for this new assisted living, and I said, well, you guys have bingo? He said, if we didn't have bingo, there would be a riot.
There would be a riot. That's so true. Got to have bingo. Trivia nights.
Sure.
Movie nights. Also a classic, although interestingly, I remember thinking this at the first place where your mom was, and then where she is now, one of the other residents mentioned this one day. I think it might have been that very first day when I rolled your mom up to the lunch table. With the movie nights, they just like put on the calendar, activities calendar, they'll just put movie night.
Yeah.
But they won't say what the movie is. And, I mean, it takes at least some effort for a lot of these people to get up to the activities room. And so I'll your mom would be in heaven if they were showing a Western, but I'm going to guess a lot of people there, maybe Westerns, not so much their thing.
Right.
So seriously, just map out what the movies are.
I don't understand. I mean, they could have Western Wednesdays. They could have...
Well, or 4 weeks in a month, First week is Western week. Second week is rom-com. Third week is
thrillers,
drama, thriller, whatever.
Yeah, something like that.
It's not that hard.
It's really not that difficult, but for some reason they don't do it.
I keep saying that if I just was going to pick a job and do something for fun, I would love to be an activities director at one of these places. Or Steve, I think you would be a great activities.
I think I'd be terrible at it. We've talked about this. I would be absolutely awful at it. I think you'd be great.
Be all fun to figure out themes and fun activities to do. But
hard
anyway,
pass.
Well, some of these places also actually have sort of specialties. Like one that we toured the first time through had a absolutely gorgeous
huge
art studio, and the artwork that had been done by the residents was really pretty impressive.
Right, that was their specialty.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And I know your mom's done some art activities.
And I will say, so this is I guess kind of a tip kind of thing. When we were hunting, and my mom was in a sniff at the time, recovering from surgery, and I pointed out art and art activities, and she kind of rolled her eyes, stuck her nose up in the air, and said, "I'm not really interested in that." But starting with the old assisted living and continuing to this one, she goes in there and does the arts and crafts. And when I come there, she shows me what she's done. It's almost like when your kid comes home from kindergarten, Mommy, look what I did. That sounds terrible. But,
I know.
But she's so proud of what she's done. Yeah. And the nice stuff. Yeah. I mean, really, they did like decoupage over seashells last week and decorated them that way. And they made little banners for their doors. And just cool stuff, fun stuff. And she really, really enjoys it far more than I think she ever thought she would.
Well, and that's the kind of thing too, like you could do it seasonally. You could have an art activity, every month that's focused on whatever the season is and, making something. You just mentioned like hanging on their doors. That would be cool if all the residents had their own artwork on their doors, month to month.
Right. And
all kinds of things.
My mom's old assisted living, one of the good things they really did do was that they had this guy, he was a gardener of some kind, an expert gardener of some kind, and he would come in once a month, and basically he would teach them about the seasonal plants that for that season, not once a month, but once a quarter. He would teach them about the seasonal plants, and then there would be some kind of art project surrounding that particular plant. And so they were learning, and they were, having a fun activity too.
It's like curriculum for school, basically.
It is, absolutely is.
Yeah, and then of course, a lot of these places have the option for the residents to sign up for things like lunch at a restaurant or even going to a museum, and so that's nice. Your mom.
Yeah, she went to Outback Steakhouse.
Yeah, she went to Outback. We didn't even know she signed up and went, and you didn't even know about it until after the fact, and that was great.
And I'll never forget, though, right before, I think I was actually at my mother's old assisted living to have a meeting, and I was sitting out in the lobby waiting for the person to come up, and there was these two little old ladies, and they were supposed to just have a little drive around outing, and they were the only ones that signed up, because it wasn't really to go anyplace, it's just a scenic drive, they said. And this little old lady, who I found out later is 102 years old, and she's just, it's good for your soul to get out.
She's not wrong.
And she's talking to this woman who's from Austria, who apparently, the funny thing about her is she's very bossy. And she was trying to boss this other woman around. Oh, it's good for you. Sit down now. You sit down now. You need to sit down. No, it's just good for your soul to get out. And the two of them just going back and forth. I was tickled by the whole thing. It was hysterical. But they wanted to get out of the building. And so that's what that was all about.
Now that we've talked about some of these, specifics and some things maybe to be on the lookout for, we have definitely mentioned this before. You definitely want to, if you have the opportunity, you want to take tours. Take tours. Tours, plural. Yeah. We'd suggest taking one during mealtime so you can kind of get a look at the food, because that is sort of important, and even pay attention to the service and how the staff deals with the residents at mealtime.
Interacts with them. And yeah. It's important.
So if you find a kind that you really like, maybe go back a second time too, and go back at a different time of day. Just kind of same kind of thing when you're buying a house. Any realtor will tell you, like, if it's an area you're not super familiar with. We did this once, one house hunt many years ago. We drove there during the day.
We stalked the house basically,
and then we drove once at night, and just to try to get a good overview all around.
Yep, and spend some time looking at the activities calendar and the meals menu. With meals, see if they have, this is kind of a big thing, make sure they have an a la carte option, because there's going to be stuff your loved one doesn't like. It just happens.
Yeah.
A lot of times what they'll have an option of, you can get a cheeseburger, or you can get a grilled cheese sandwich, you can get a soup. There's a soup of the day sometimes. My mother likes to just get a scoop of chicken salad. They've always got that available, and like a tomato on the side, and she's perfectly happy. She could eat that like basically every day, I think.
Yeah.
So make sure there's a good a la carte option, and ask about response time when the resident presses the bell or their little button. We mentioned this. It can be a problem, but understand the person who's giving you the tour, I hate to say this, but I believe it's 100% true. A lot of times they're just going to tell you what they think you want to hear.
Right. These places,
they're going to say, oh, sure, 15 minutes.
In the end, these places are for profit.
Yes, they are.
And they have usually like a director of marketing or director of sales
or community relations or something like that.
And it is their job to make sure that these rooms stay filled.
Yes.
So of course they are going to tell you how absolutely fabulous it is.
Right.
So that's also
a lot of questions you're going to ask. You're going to hear what they think you want to hear. And I hate that, but it's just the truth. It's their job. They're doing their jobs.
But I think that's also why, at least maybe if you can go back a few times, different times of the day to look around, and I don't know, maybe you can kind of glean a little bit more each time you go to try to balance out what you're being sold versus what you're actually really seeing.
And, another problem is, while you're going in these tours, they're not going to let you just wander around by yourself, because if you could wander around by yourself, you could find another family member,
right?
Or you could talk to a resident, or you can get the real deal.
Of course, I guess we were already moving your mom in, but a couple times when we were moving stuff in, I was asking staff in the hallway, what do you think about it here?
But that was after we signed up. They're not going to let you just wander around.
Yeah,
it's not, probably for insurance purposes or whatever. And there's really no way to verify this information unless you know somebody who lives there. And it's a good idea. If you're really interested in something, maybe put something out on Facebook or whatever. Hey, do any of my friends know somebody who lives at this place?
I mean, of course, there's Google reviews out there.
Yes.
But I think what we discovered is a lot of times it's like they could be written by people who work at the facility or it's very well curated content or reviews. And so
after we moved my mother out of this last place and just how terrible it had become, I went just curiously, I went to look at the Google reviews to see if there had been some new bad ones. And I did add a bad one. It was really scathing. But I went through and looked at all these positive reviews from people that I knew worked there. Yeah. And they were probably told to do it. I know one of them was the assistant marketing director who showed rooms. And I know for a fact, I mean, she does love it there, but she loves the people. She understands that place has a lot of problems. So there were a lot of glowing reviews that I think were just put on there to push out the bad one. One
of the really good ways, subtle ways that you can sort of assess the facility and how good of a facility it is to ask people how long they've worked there.
Yes.
So executive directors, healthcare directors, even the activity director.
Sure.
How long have you worked here? I feel certain we mentioned this on an episode or two ago. I mean, the place where your mom was, We'd been through multiple
Revolving door.
executive directors and healthcare directors, and this place where she is now, the executive director has been there for 10 years.
Yes, and the community
There's something to
relations
be said for
director,
that.
who he's the one that shows apartments. He wears a lot of hats, but that's one of the things he does. He's been there 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
The activities director hasn't been there as long, but just solidity at the top makes so much difference. And I actually even asked what's the average length of tenure for your CNAs and your med techs, and he said 3 years.
Yeah.
Which means some of them have probably been there a while. Some of them have probably been there, 6 months.
Yeah.
But that's actually much better than the old place, I think, for sure.
But, just right. So these are just little questions that you can ask that can help you like put all of the pieces of the puzzle together to hopefully get a decent picture of what's really happening at that specific
it's just
place.
so hard because it's almost like you have to do an investigation on a place. And, you really do. You really do. You can't do background checks on everybody, but you have to do everything you possibly can to try to figure out if they're just feeding you a line of crap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to consider location. Obviously, that means both the location of the facility and the location of the available apartment in the facility.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw this in our first search for my mother's assisted living. They had an apartment available, but it was on the 4th floor, all the way at the end of the hallway.
We talked about that.
It was dark up there,
it would have
taken so long for her just to even get to the elevator, and she probably wouldn't have left her apartment really ever. So, both places where my mother has lived, she's been relatively close to the dining room, which is important. They want to be close to the dining room, or activities, or just so you're not in the middle of nowhere in the building.
Yeah.
That's important.
It just makes things easier. So,
and obviously you want to find a place that's reasonably close to where you live because you're going to be going back and forth.
Selfishly. Selfishly. And that's one thing we kind of had to sacrifice a little bit with this move. Your mom's a little further away than she was
It went
before.
from a little bit less than 15 minutes to a little bit less than 25. It's not that bad, but round trip adds up.
20 to 25 5 extra minutes every trip. And there's something to be said for that. So I think we said this, you need to look at the available apartment inside the building and consider how mobile they are. Just don't forget that.
If they're the type that really has no trouble walking down a hallway, then you don't have to worry too much about it. I mean, the new place has some ramps here or there. Yeah. And my mother, she actually did get up one of the ramps, she said.
Oh, by herself?
Yeah, she said she was out of breath by the time she
I'm
did
sure
it. And
she
I really
was,
wish she
still.
wouldn't do that. She just got impatient.
Okay. Yeah, but
we know she can do it.
That's
she
good.
Can do it.
So, I think the last thing, maybe not the last thing, but for us to talk about today that you want to consider is the condition of the building itself. So, is it well maintained? This can be an indicator of how maintenance requests will be handled. Because remember, again, you're at the mercy. This isn't, it's not a home that you own and you can call someone to come in and repair things. You're really putting in maintenance requests like you live in an apartment building. Mm-hmm. So you do kind of want to see how well maintained things are. Now, that being said, older building versus newer building, wouldn't worry so much about that. That has nothing to do with how well the facility is run. And again, we have the perfect example because where your mom just came from, building, shiny, new, pretty, bright.
Really nice facility.
Yeah, it looks really, beautiful movie theater with leather recliner chairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But oof, not good. This place where she is now, it's a little worn looking, but it's
not dingy, but it's just an older building. The place she was in was like 5 or 6 years old. The place she's in now is like 22, 23.
It was back when wallpaper was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And, the wallpaper might be peeling in some corners. But it's so much more well run than the last place.
And that's the thing is even if you see a place that looks a little older, like we're talking about here, don't necessarily just scratch it off the list because like I said, the place she's in now, I have almost no complaints.
Yeah.
And that's saying a lot.
And I think we talked about this very early on in this podcast series. And I'm thinking about the very first place we toured for your mom, which was this beautiful old historic building in the middle of the city, tree-lined streets around. The building had, some pretty cool history to it. But again, that was the one where your mom would have been on the 4th floor down at the end of the hallway. And even in thinking back to where their activities room was and where their dining, everything was
hard to get to.
It was all really hard to get to. Remember, there were these weird switchback ramps and things.
Sure.
Pay. It might sound silly, but truly pay attention to those kinds of things.
Just keep your eyes open and notice everything.
Yes.
While you're doing the tour, notice everything.
Yeah.
And here's where you can turn for help. So we mentioned, they're going to tell you what they want to tell you. You can get help, though. There are companies all over the country. There are national chains, as far as I know, that do this. They will help you with your search for an assisted living facility. And the best part is it doesn't cost you a thing. The way that it works is they then get a commission when, for instance, your loved one moves into an assisted living.
From the facility.
Right. It's a referral. It's a referral commission. Yeah. So if you choose to go this route, though, and we actually used one for this last one, and I will tell you, the place my mom lives now, I did not know it existed. Yeah. And we would never have found it if it weren't for this person. And they can give you some background information. And you want to go, however, there are national chains. I mentioned that. If you can find one, find a local one, a locally based one. And that they're going to give you much better background information, because what I've been told is these national chains, and I won't mention the name, there is a national chain. It's pretty easy to get a franchise, and you don't have to know what you're doing. And a lot of what happens is they just jump into it and say, hey, I'll help you. And they don't really know.
Yeah.
So the one that I used, the woman that owns the place, that runs the business, she actually used to be a PT director at a local assisted living and worked at several others. She did in-home care at these assisted livings all over the area. So she knew a lot of them already, and she knew the inside workings of all of them. And she said, there are some that I will not recommend.
Yeah.
And one of them is now the place that my mother just moved out of. She said, I'm not recommending that place anymore, because she talked to me and someone else who was also searching and got the same story.
Yep. Yeah.
So, if you find a good one, they will steer you in the right direction. For sure. For sure. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. That's the end of our episode. I did want to say we did get an email from a listener named Kathy.
Awesome.
And she was listening to the long-term caregiving episode, which was from last year, and really good episode with our friend Robin, the medical social worker.
Yeah.
And she had a pointer for that, and I think it was a really good pointer, because I've come across this problem before. She said, if you're moving someone from place to place or handling bills and stuff, you have to make sure that you either have their phone or their email access to one or the other, because a lot of times places are going to send you a verification email to say, are you who you say you are?
Yeah.
Or you have to be in the same room with your loved one, who can then verify that you are allowed to do what you're trying to do. Yeah. And this happened with me trying to cancel my mother's cable company service.
I was just going to say, I mean, that is a great tip for anyone taking care of anyone else. I don't care what their age is. But yeah, I mean, I have access, my brother and I do. We have access to every account my mom has, whether it's a bank account, an email account, her Facebook account, whatever it is. Between the two of us, we have access to all of those things because, right, exactly, two-factor authentication in this day and age where everything could and should be locked down way more than it used to be. Yeah, right. Don't slow yourself down. So, Kathy, thanks for pointing that out. You're absolutely right.
I came across that very thing. I was trying to cancel her cable because in the new place, TV and internet are included. And what I did when I set it up to begin with, I put it in her name because I didn't want to put it in my name, because I already had cable service, internet service at our house, and I didn't want there to be confusion. Well, if I put it in my name, it would have been a lot easier, because instead what I had to do was go sit with my mother on hold with this company. You know how this works. You're on hold for 20 minutes before you can get a human being. We had to sit there, and then I had to hand the phone to my mother and her say yes. Now, the funny thing that Kathy said she has managed to successfully impersonate her mother before. Which is easier if you're a woman impersonating your mother.
Well, right. I guess I could do that too. You, my brother, you guys would not be able to do that. I could not
impersonate my mother. It would be laughable if I tried, I think.
Go, Kathy. That's good. Yeah. Way to be creative and think on the spot.
Yeah. She also talked about the importance of things like power of attorney and whatnot, which we are going to do an episode on that in the perhaps not too distant future with a legal expert.
Yeah, because we've definitely touched on that, but I know there's a lot of stuff we don't know about that, but yes, it's all in that same vein of just making sure that when you get in these situations, whether it's trying to help your loved one set up some kind of account, whether it's trying to get them, move to a new location, whether they're in the hospital and you're trying to help with something, you have to make sure that you have all those things squared away.
It's true. It's true. Okay, so once again, thanks to Kathy for sending that in. That was really, really useful. And thanks to Kathy for listening. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, if you have a question, a comment, if you want to sponsor this podcast, give us some money. We have options. Email us, caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can send us a text or leave us a voicemail. We love voicemails. 804-723-1221 is the number. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter, the handle is @Gen X Caregiving. We're also on Facebook. The best way to get to that page and make sure it's the correct page is to use the link in the show notes to this podcast. We hope to hear from you soon, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening.
Good night, everyone.